Samuel Carter had spent the last 10 years serving the Whitmore family with unwavering loyalty. He wasn't just a driver, he was the one who picked up Mr. Henry Whitmore after his late-night business meetings, the one who ensured Mrs. Whitmore got to her charity events on time, and the one who patiently waited outside Veronica Whitmore's high society parties, ready to drive the billionaire's daughter home, no matter how late or drunk she was. That night was no different. Samuel sat in the car, hands resting on the wheel, watching the grand estate from a distance as music and laughter spilled out onto the massive driveway. It was nearly 2 a.m., and the party was still raging. He sighed, knowing this was going to be another long night. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Whitmore. "Veronica is drunk. Bring her home safely." Samuel exhaled, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. He knew the drill. Inside, the mansion was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and spilled champagne. A few partygoers were still lingering, slumped on couches, too wasted to move. And there she was, Veronica, draped across a velvet chair, a half-empty glass dangling from her fingers, her designer dress slightly askew. "Come on, Miss Whitmore," Samuel said gently, reaching out to steady her as she staggered to her feet. "Let's get you home," she giggled, leaning into him. "You're always so serious, Samuel. Relax a little." Samuel kept his expression neutral as he led her outside. This wasn't the first time she'd acted this way. But as always, he maintained his professionalism. The drive home was quiet, save for Veronica humming to herself in the back seat. When they arrived, he helped her out of the car and guided her into the house. "You're a good man, Samuel," she murmured, gripping his arm a little too tightly. "Too good." Samuel gently pulled away and stepped back. "Get some rest, Miss Whitmore." But as he turned to leave, she grabbed his wrist. "Stay," she whispered. Samuel's stomach tightened. Miss Whitmore, I need to go." Her grip tightened. "You don't want to stay?" He took a deep breath. "I think you've had too much to drink. I'll see you in the morning." He turned, but before he could take another step, he heard a rip. He spun around just in time to see Veronica claw at her own dress, tearing the fabric at the shoulder. Then, she screamed. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. Samuel's heart stopped. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and then, Mr. Whitmore. The billionaire stormed into the room, eyes wild with confusion and anger. And there was his daughter, his precious, fragile daughter, collapsed on the floor, her dress torn, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "Daddy," she sobbed, pointing at Samuel. He tried to." Samuel froze. "No, sir, please, I didn't." "How dare you?" Mr. Whitmore roared. Samuel's stomach churned with disbelief. "Sir, I swear to you, this isn't what it looks like." Mr. Whitmore's eyes burned with fury. "Guards, get this filth out of my house." Within seconds, 2 security guards grabbed Samuel by the arms. He struggled, but their grip was like iron. "Sir, please, you know me." Mr. Whitmore's face was stone. "I thought I did." Veronica let out another shaky sob, curling into herself. "I told him to stop," she whimpered. "But he wouldn't." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. And then, the cold, hard click of handcuffs around his wrists, the flashing red and blue lights outside. The officer's voice, low and detached, "You have the right to remain silent." Samuel didn't even fight as they pushed him into the back of the police car. He just sat there, staring at the Whitmore mansion as it shrank in the distance, his entire life unraveling in a single, unforgivable lie. His last thought before the cell door slammed shut behind him was this: "This is injustice, and no one will ever believe me." The jail cell was cold, the air thick with the scent of sweat and despair. Samuel sat on the thin mattress, his hands clenched into fists, his mind replaying the last few hours over and over. It didn't feel real. One moment, he had been the trusted driver of one of the most powerful men in the country. The next, he was a criminal, accused of a crime so vile that even the guards wouldn't look him in the eye. His head snapped up at the sound of metal clanking against metal. A guard stood at the cell door, his expression unreadable. "You've got visitors," the guard said. Samuel stood, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. Maybe it was Mr. Whitmore, finally realizing his mistake. Maybe it was someone, anyone, who could help him. But when he stepped into the visitors' area and saw who was sitting on the other side of the thick glass, his stomach dropped. It wasn't his lawyer. It wasn't his family. It was Veronica Whitmore. Dressed in all white, looking as fragile as ever, she played the role of a broken victim so well it made Samuel sick. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her lip trembling. She lifted the phone receiver, waiting for him to do the same. He hesitated, then picked it up. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low and filled with quiet fury. Veronica bit her lip, her gaze darting to the side as if she were afraid someone was watching. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "I didn't think they'd take it this far." Samuel's fingers tightened around the receiver. "Are you kidding me?" he hissed. "You accused me of something unspeakable, and now you're saying you didn't think they'd take it seriously?" Tears welled up in her eyes. I panicked. My father, he saw us together, and I had to say something." Samuel let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "So you ruined my life because you were scared?" She flinched. "I can fix this," she whispered. "I can tell my father the truth. I can." Samuel cut her off with a glare so sharp it could have drawn blood. "No, you won't," he said, "because you're too much of a coward. You wanted this, Veronica. You wanted to ruin me because I didn't give you what you wanted, and now I'm the one paying for your lies." Veronica's lip trembled. "Please, just let me talk to my father." Samuel leaned forward, his voice like steel. "Then do it. Fix this before it's too late." But before she could respond, a loud voice interrupted them. "That's enough. Mr. Whitmore." Samuel turned his head slowly, his blood running cold. The billionaire stood just outside the visitors' area, his face unreadable. Veronica turned to her father, her voice breaking. "Daddy, go home, Veronica." His voice was like ice. She faltered. "But I said go home." Veronica swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Then, without another word, she turned and left, disappearing behind the heavy doors. Samuel watched her go before turning his attention back to Mr. Whitmore, who was now walking toward him, his steps slow and measured. He picked up the phone on the other side of the glass. Samuel hesitated, then did the same. "I trusted you," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice dangerously calm. "I didn't do it," Samuel said, his voice unwavering. Mr. Whitmore let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You expect me to believe that?" "Yes," Samuel said simply. The older man's jaw tightened. "Do you know what it's like to see your daughter broken? To see her sobbing, terrified, telling me you tried to force yourself on her?" Samuel's stomach churned. "She's lying." Mr. Whitmore's eyes darkened. "If I find out you're telling the truth," he said, "I will destroy her." Samuel's breath caught. "But if you're lying," Mr. Whitmore leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I will make sure you never see the outside of this cell again." Then he hung up the phone and walked away, leaving Samuel with a single horrifying realization. Mr. Whitmore wasn't certain, and that meant Samuel still had a chance to prove the truth, a chance to take back his life. But he had to act fast, because if he didn't, the walls of this prison cell would become his new home forever. The days blurred together into an endless loop of misery. Samuel Carter, a man who had spent years serving the Whitmore family with nothing but loyalty, now sat rotting in a prison cell, branded a monster. He had no trial date yet, no way to defend himself, just the weight of an accusation that had already sealed his fate in the eyes of the world. The news painted him as a disgrace. His mugshot was plastered across tabloids and headlines, each article twisting the lie further, ensuring that even strangers despised him. Billionaire's daughter survives horrific attack. Family driver arrested. Trusted employee turns predator. Justice must be served. There was no justice, only the verdict of the powerful. Samuel sat in his cell, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. Every breath he took felt heavier, knowing that outside these walls, the world had already moved on, condemning him without a second thought. The worst part wasn't the cold, the lack of privacy, or the whispers of other inmates who eyed him like a disgrace even among criminals. It was the betrayal. He had devoted his life to the Whitmores, believing that in return, his honesty and loyalty would count for something. He had been faithful. He had done everything right. And yet, here he was, left to rot because one girl had chosen to lie to protect herself from her father's judgment. And Mr. Whitmore, the man Samuel had once respected, the man who had trusted him for years, until one night shattered it all. Samuel clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wasn't angry because of his suffering. He wasn't even angry because the world had turned its back on him. He was angry because he knew the truth. He had seen it in Mr. Whitmore's eyes. Doubt. The billionaire wasn't completely convinced of his daughter's story. And yet, he still let this happen. He still let his employee be dragged away like filth, rather than confronting the possibility that his own flesh and blood might be the true villain. It was easier for Mr. Whitmore to believe in Samuel's guilt than to face the inconvenient truth. That was the real injustice. One night, one lie. And now, Samuel Carter was just another nameless, forgotten man locked behind bars, stripped of dignity, and waiting for a court that would never give him a fair trial. The only visitors he had were lawyers sent by Mr. Whitmore, lawyers who were not there to defend him but to make sure he pleaded guilty. They urged him to accept a plea deal, to admit to a crime he never committed. "Take the deal," one of them said coldly, sliding papers across the table. "You plead guilty and we negotiate for a lesser sentence. You could be out in 10 years. Samuel stared at the papers in front of him. The words blurred. 10 years. 10 years of being a criminal in the eyes of the world. 10 years of losing everything, his career, his life, his dignity. 10 years of accepting a punishment for something he did not do. He pushed the papers away. "No." The lawyer barely reacted. He simply sighed and leaned back. "If you fight this, you'll lose. You have no one backing you. The press already destroyed your image. Juries favor victims. A rich, fragile girl against a working-class man? You think they'll believe you?" Samuel felt a bitter laugh rising in his throat. "I don't need them to believe me. I need the truth." The lawyer smirked, shaking his head. "Truth doesn't matter, Mr. Carter. Power does." And with that, the lawyer gathered his papers and left. Samuel sat there, staring at the empty seat across from him. He had no power, no money, no voice. And yet, despite all that, he would not break. Because he knew something that Mr. Whitmore didn't. Truth had a way of surfacing, and one day when that truth came out, they would all pay for what they had done to him. The cell was suffocating, not because of its size, but because of what it represented. A cage built from lies. Samuel Carter sat on the thin mattress, staring at the metal bars as if they were an extension of Veronica Whitmore's deception. Days passed in a haze, one bleeding into the next. The court system dragged its feet, prolonging his suffering with delay after delay. No trial date, no way to prove his innocence, just an endless waiting game designed to break him. And yet, he refused to be broken. The whispers followed him wherever he went. "That's the guy who attacked the billionaire's daughter. Sick bastard. He had everything. Why throw it away for that?" Even among criminals, Samuel was a pariah. He could feel their eyes on him, judgmental and disgusted. He had nothing in common with them, and yet in their minds he was worse, because he had betrayed trust. Or at least, that was the story they believed. The prison guards weren't much better. They didn't bother hiding their contempt. Some took pleasure in making his life harder, serving him cold food, delaying his showers, accidentally shoving him during head counts. And through it all, Samuel remained silent. What was the point in defending himself? No one was listening. The only visitor who came was his public defender, an exhausted woman with too many cases and not enough time. She sat across from him, flipping through paperwork, her lips pursed. "Samuel, I won't lie to you. This isn't looking good." He already knew that. "There's no physical evidence against you, but that doesn't matter. You were found in her room, her dress was torn, and she's crying to the press about how violated she feels." Samuel clenched his jaw. "She tore it herself," the lawyer sighed. "It's your word against hers, and she's rich, beautiful, and powerful. The public already made up their minds. The jury won't be any different." Samuel leaned forward. "Then I need proof." The lawyer hesitated. "What kind of proof?" "Anything that shows her real behavior. Security footage, phone calls, something." She looked at him, almost pitying. "The Whitmores have money. If there was footage that proved you innocent, don't you think it would have already disappeared?" His stomach sank. He knew she was right, but something inside him refused to accept it. The Whitmores were powerful, but Veronica was reckless. She must have slipped up somewhere. As the lawyer gathered her things, she paused. "If you have anyone on the outside, someone who believes you, maybe they can help." That was the problem. Samuel had no one. His mother had passed away years ago. His father had abandoned him before he could even remember his face. He had no siblings, no close friends. And Lucy, his fiancée, no, his former fiancée. She hadn't visited, not once. He still remembered the last time he saw her, standing in the police station, her face twisted in anger. "I can't believe I almost married you." Samuel had reached for her, his heart pounding. "Lucy, please, don't touch me." She ripped off her engagement ring, letting it fall to the floor with a metallic clink. "You make me sick." She had walked away without looking back, and just like that, the life he had built was gone. Samuel rubbed his face, exhaling shakily. He needed to get out of here. He needed to prove his innocence. But how? Then, out of nowhere, a name surfaced in his mind. Ella, Lucy's best friend. She had been there that night at the police station, watching silently as Lucy left him. She hadn't spoken to him, but she hadn't looked at him with disgust either. Could she believe him? Would she even listen? Samuel had nothing left to lose. He had to try. The next time his lawyer visited, he gave her a single request: find Ella and tell her I need her help. Ella had spent the last 3 years haunted by the weight of silence. She had been there that night, when the police dragged Samuel away, when Lucy threw her engagement ring at his feet, when Mr. Whitmore declared to the press that his daughter's innocence had been stolen by a man they once trusted. And through it all, she had remained silent, because she was afraid. Afraid of losing her friendship with Lucy. Afraid of what the Whitmores would do if she spoke out. Afraid that maybe, just maybe, Samuel was telling the truth. And if he was, then she had stood by and watched an innocent man be destroyed. The guilt gnawed at her, but guilt wasn't enough. She had wanted to help, but what could she do against a billionaire family that controlled everything? She was just a nobody. Until now, when the lawyer had shown up at her tiny apartment, Ella's hands had started shaking. "Samuel Carter needs your help." It was the first time in 3 years that someone had said his name to her. And now, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter she had received. Samuel's handwriting was still the same. Strong, deliberate, steady. "Ella, I don't know if you believe me. I don't blame you if you don't. But if there is even the slightest chance that you ever doubted what happened that night, I need you to help me. There is proof. I know there is. The Whitmores are powerful, but Veronica is reckless. If you can find something, anything, it might be the only way I get out of here. If you don't want to get involved, I understand. But if you do, you might be the only person left who can help me." Ella exhaled shakily. She didn't know what terrified her more, the idea that she was about to go up against the Whitmores, or the realization that she had been complicit in Samuel's suffering for 3 years. Either way, she couldn't stay silent anymore. She pulled out her phone, hesitated for only a second, and then dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Lucy picked up on the second ring. "Ella?" Lucy's voice was groggy, like she had just woken up. "God, it's late. What's going on?" Ella took a breath. "I need to see you." Lucy groaned. "Can it wait? It's almost midnight." "No." Ella gripped the edge of her table. "It really can't." There was a pause. Then Lucy sighed. "Fine. Come over." Ella hung up, grabbed her keys press, and headed out the door. Tonight, everything was going to change. Lucy's apartment was exactly the same. Same designer furniture, same expensive candles burning on the counter, same perfectly curated life. But Lucy wasn't the same. She looked tired. Her hair was unbrushed, her silk robe was wrinkled, and when she opened the door, there was something unfamiliar in her eyes. Discomfort. She hadn't forgotten, then. Ella stepped inside, her heart hammering. Lucy shut the door behind her, rubbing her temples. "Okay, what's so important that it couldn't wait until morning?" Ella hesitated. How did she even start this conversation? "Hey, remember how we abandoned Samuel when he needed us the most?" "Yeah, turns out we were wrong." Instead, she asked, "Have you ever thought about him?" Lucy stilled. "Who? You know who?" For a long moment, Lucy didn't respond. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a wine glass, and poured herself a generous amount of red wine. Then she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I think about him all the time, Ella." She took a sip. "I think about how I let myself love someone who turned out to be a monster. I think about how I wasted years of my life on a lie." Ella's hands curled into fists. "What if it wasn't a lie?" Lucy set the glass down, hard. "What?" Ella swallowed. "What if we were wrong?" Lucy's face twisted. "Ella, don't do this." "Do what?" "Don't start acting like you suddenly care." Lucy's voice shook. "You didn't say anything back then. You watched me fall apart, just like I watched you do nothing. If you believed he was innocent, why didn't you speak up then? Ella's stomach twisted. Because I was scared. Lucy let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Yeah, me too. They stood in silence for a long moment. Ella didn't know what she had expected. For Lucy to break down and admit that she had doubts? For her to say that she regretted turning her back on Samuel? But Lucy wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So Ella changed tactics. You still talk to Veronica, right? Lucy's jaw tensed. Yeah. Why? Ella took a slow breath. Has she ever mentioned Samuel? Even once? Lucy hesitated. Then, not really, she muttered, picking up her wine glass again. She doesn't like talking about it. She gets all weird and defensive when I bring it up. Ella's pulse quickened. Why would she be defensive if she was really the victim? Lucy flinched. Ella pressed on. Has she ever slipped up? Said anything that didn't add up? Lucy's fingers tightened around her glass. There was one time. Ella's breath caught. When? Lucy exhaled. A year ago. We were drinking at her place, and I made some joke about how she always gets what she wants, and she snapped. Ella's heart pounded. What did she say? Lucy shook her head. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like, not always. Sometimes when people say no, you have to make them regret it. Ella felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath her feet. This was it, the first crack in the lie. She just had to push harder. Lucy, she whispered, I need you to help me. Lucy's expression darkened. Help you do what? Ella met her gaze, her voice unwavering. Help me expose Veronica. Chapter 7. The Weight of the Lie. Lucy's fingers trembled around her wineglass. The room, though luxurious and warm, suddenly felt cold, too quiet, too heavy. Expose her? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Ella nodded, leaning forward. You know something isn't right. You've known it for a long time. Lucy let out a shaky breath, setting her glass down. Even if I have doubts, what can we do? She's a Whitmore. Samuel is already in prison. The world already believes her. Ella's throat tightened. That's the problem, Lucy. We let this happen. We let them bury him. But if there's even a sliver of a chance to prove the truth, we have to take it. Lucy rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident in her every movement. And what exactly do you want me to do? Ella hesitated for only a second before saying, Get close to her. She trusts you. She's comfortable around you. If she's guilty, she'll slip up again. Lucy scoffed. And then what? Even if she admits something, that's not proof. That's just words. Ella's hands curled into fists. Then we get proof. Silence stretched between them. Lucy closed her eyes, exhaling deeply before opening them again. You're asking me to betray one of the most powerful families in the country. Ella's voice didn't waver. No, Lucy, I'm asking you to do the right thing. Lucy looked away, staring at the wine bottle, as if searching for answers at the bottom of the glass. Then finally, fine, she whispered. I'll talk to her. Ella's heart pounded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Lucy's fingers trembled around her wineglass. The room, though luxurious and warm, suddenly felt cold, too quiet, too heavy. Expose her? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Ella nodded, leaning forward. You know something isn't right. You've known it for a long time. Lucy let out a shaky breath, setting her glass down. Even if I have doubts, what can we do? She's a Whitmore. Samuel is already in prison. The world already believes her. Ella's throat tightened. That's the problem, Lucy. We let this happen. We let them bury him. But if there's even a sliver of a chance to prove the truth, we have to take it. Lucy rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident in her every movement. And what exactly do you want me to do? Ella hesitated for only a second before saying, Get close to her. She trusts you. She's comfortable around you. If she's guilty, she'll slip up again. Lucy scoffed. And then what? Even if she admits something, that's not proof. That's just words. Ella's hands curled into fists. Then we get proof. Silence stretched between them. Lucy closed her eyes, exhaling deeply before opening them again. You're asking me to betray one of the most powerful families in the country. Ella's voice didn't waver. No, Lucy, I'm asking you to do the right thing. Lucy looked away, staring at the wine bottle as if searching for answers at the bottom of the glass. Then finally, Fine, she whispered. I'll talk to her. Ella's heart pounded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 2 weeks passed before Lucy finally gave Ella the call she had been waiting for. She wants to have dinner, Lucy said over the phone. Just the two of us. Ella's grip on the receiver tightened. Good, that means she trusts you. Lucy let out a dry laugh. That, or she's just lonely. Ella ignored the bitterness in Lucy's voice. It doesn't matter. Just get her to talk. That night, Lucy arrived at Veronica Whitmore's private penthouse. It was the same as ever, cold and clinical, filled with expensive furniture that no one ever sat on, decorated with art that Veronica didn't understand. The only warmth in the room was the wine in their glasses. Veronica laughed at something meaningless, twirling a strand of her perfect blonde hair. It's been too long, Luce. I've missed you. Lucy forced a smile. Same. She waited until the second bottle of wine was empty before she said, casually, You remember Samuel? Veronica's expression faltered for half a second before she recovered. Of course, she scoffed. What a disgusting man. Lucy feigned amusement. I still can't believe he tried something with you. It's insane. Veronica rolled her eyes. Right? But men are like that. They think they can do whatever they want. Lucy let the words settle before she played her hand. You must have been terrified. Veronica swirled her wine, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. I handled it. Lucy took a slow sip of her drink. How? Veronica blinked. Lucy tilted her head, her voice soft but deliberate. How did you handle it, Veronica? Veronica's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, You'd be surprised how easy it is to make people believe something when they want to. Lucy's stomach twisted. She knew, right then and there, that she had just heard the truth. Ella sat in the corner of her apartment, staring at the recording. Her hands were shaking. She had told Lucy to wear a wire. And now, in the dim glow of her laptop screen, Veronica's voice echoed back at her. You'd be surprised how easy it is to make people believe something when they want to. Ella covered her mouth with her hand. It wasn't enough to overturn a conviction, but it was enough to make people listen. She picked up her phone and dialed the lawyer's number. We have something, she whispered. We have something real. And for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Carter had a chance. Ella had never felt time move so slowly. She sat on the edge of her seat, phone pressed tightly against her ear as the lawyer, Daniel Mercer, played the recording back for the third time. He exhaled sharply. This is big, but it's not enough. Ella's heart sank. What do you mean? It's a confession. It's an implication, Daniel corrected. Veronica Whitmore didn't say outright that she lied. She hinted at it. A skilled defense team will argue that she was merely commenting on public perception, not admitting to framing Samuel. Ella gritted her teeth. So what? We do nothing? Daniel was silent for a moment. Then his voice dropped. We need proof that she fabricated the accusation, something undeniable, something that will force the system to listen. Ella closed her eyes, frustration mounting. And how the hell do we get that? You said Mr. Whitmore has security footage all over the estate, Daniel said. If he hasn't destroyed the tapes from that night, that's where the truth is. Ella's stomach tightened. Getting the tapes meant going straight into the lion's den, but there was no other choice. Breaking into a billionaire's estate wasn't just dangerous, it was nearly impossible. The Whitmore mansion had security on every floor, had motion sensors in every hall, and a private security team trained to keep out unwanted visitors. But Ella had an advantage. She had worked there before. She knew the weak spots, and she knew exactly when the night staff took their breaks. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped through the side entrance, one the housekeepers used to take out the trash. Every step was a battle against fear. If she got caught, there would be no explaining this away. She wouldn't get a second chance. The security room was on the second floor past the east wing. The monitors inside displayed every inch of the estate, but the real goldmine, the stored footage, was in the archive room just beyond it. Heart pounding, she crept forward. A guard passed just inches from her hiding spot, yawning as he stretched. Ella barely breathed until he disappeared around the corner. She moved quickly, slipping inside the archive room and shutting the door behind her. Rows of servers blinked back at her. She had only minutes. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through folders of time-stamped footage. And then, she found it. The night it happened, she clicked the file, the grainy black and white footage loading on the screen. There was Veronica, swaying drunkenly. There was Samuel, standing rigid, his hands in clear view. There was Veronica grabbing his wrist, pulling him toward her. And then, there it was. Veronica ripping her own dress. Ella's breath hitched, and then, in chilling clarity, Veronica letting out a blood-curdling scream. Ella's fingers shook as she copied the file onto a flash drive. This was it. This was the truth. But just as she ejected the drive, she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. The sound of footsteps approaching the door. Ella had nowhere to run. The door swung open, and there stood Henry Whitmore. His face was unreadable, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto the flash drive clutched in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice as cold as steel, he said, "Give it to me." Ella's grip tightened. "You know the truth now." His jaw twitched. "I've always known." Her breath caught. "Then why?" "Because the world runs on power," he interrupted, "not truth." Ella shook her head. "Not this time." Henry took a slow step forward. "You think you can stop this? Even if you release that footage, do you think the world will care? My lawyers will tear it apart. The media will spin it, and you," he let out a small, humorless laugh, "you will disappear." Ella refused to back down. "You can't bury this forever." Henry Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he smiled. "You're braver than I expected." Then he stepped aside. Ella stared at him, unsure if this was some kind of trap. Henry simply gestured toward the door. "Go. You want the world to know? Then tell them." Her heart thundered in her chest. But she didn't waste time questioning it. She ran. The next morning, the footage went viral. News stations ran the clip on a loop. Social media erupted in outrage. The world had been lied to. Samuel Carter had been innocent all along. Veronica Whitmore was arrested within hours. Her sobbing mugshot became the most shared image on the internet. As for Henry Whitmore, he never made a statement. By the time the authorities arrived at his estate, he was gone, vanished. But it no longer mattered. The truth had finally won. Samuel Carter stepped out of the prison gates, his hands trembling as they met fresh air for the first time in 3 years. Ella was waiting. Tears welled in her eyes as she ran to him, throwing her arms around his shoulders. "You're free," she whispered. "You're finally free." Samuel exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Ella said, pulling back to look at him. "Just live your life, be happy." He gave her a small, tired smile. For the first time in years, he finally had the chance to try.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.